Thank you so much for sitting down with us
Absolutely.
at California Courier. I wanted to talk about the OC Board of Education's audit. And let's start from the very beginning. Can you take me back to when you learned about this audit and what your reaction was?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I didn't learn about it until pretty close to the hearing. Actually, it was something that obviously we've seen in the legislature for a number of years. There have been attempts through legislation and different vehicles to really quote unquote crack down right on school boards that or county boards of education that the majority party in the legislature disagrees with. And I think that's a huge problem, right, for local government. That's a huge problem for free speech. It's a huge problem for elections. So I think there have been a lot of trends in this direction. This year, the senator decided to try to go at this in a way of auditing, right? Auditing this board of education that, I think the way I put it in committee is he really weaponized the audit process, and I think set a really bad precedent moving forward for if you disagree with someone politically or if you disagree with an entity on a political basis, then you can, kind of use the audit process to harm them or, you know, uh, create more barriers for them or more challenges for them. So it's, I found it to be very problematic and was sad to see that audit move forward despite pretty strong opposition.
And so during that hearing, you had a couple of clips that kind of circulated around.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about those and your pushback against the senator.
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't give the senator a heads up on any of this. I just
Mhm.
sort of went at it because I was honestly pretty shocked to see the level that he was going to really go after what I think he sees as a political, um, opponent. So what we talked to him about in the committee hearing is number one, in some of their testimony, one of the reasons that they want this audit to happen is because this board of education continues to support school choice, continues to support charter schools, choice for families that apparently they find objectionable. That is in no way a reason to audit an organization or a board of education. And what's even more frustrating is there was evidence brought forward by the board, and there was zero evidence presented to counteract it. That there has been no fiscal reason to audit this board. They've been very fiscally responsible. They've been very above board. Usually, when we're auditing something in the audit committee, it's because there's a huge problem, right?
Mhm.
So a few years ago, I pushed an audit of the $24 billion of money we've spent on homelessness in California because there's been a ton of waste, a ton of abuse, and a lack of accountability. That's the type of things that the audit committee should be used for. In this case, there was nothing like that. And it was just seemed to be a personal and political disagreement. And the fact that this board tends to approve charter schools that they wanted to look into it more.
He brought up the issue of the lawsuits as some of the eyebrow raising that he has done. Can you tell me if there's any concerns from your end about the lawsuits that they've joined? I talked to some of the people on the Board of Education. They told me about the lawsuits up front when we had a interview, and they were very straightforward about some of the lawsuits that they joined were against the COVID mandates
Yep.
and other things that were, they believed, harming children and during their school time. So
Yeah, honestly, and that part was also pretty unbelievable. In addition to, I think, the school choice issue, there was also he took issue with lawsuits that the board had filed against the state. That, in my mind, I was actually on a school board during COVID
mhm,
19, in a very similar position to this board, and I would have loved to have been able to take on the state in some of
mhm,
these lawsuits. They took on the masking of kids, which at a certain point in the pandemic, it was very clear from the science that it was completely ridiculous to continue masking kids, and it was harming their education and their engagement with each other and with their teachers. They also took on, the issue of school closures, which California was the worst actor when it came to school closures, had the longest school shutdowns in the entire country. Long after most states had gone back to in-person instruction, California was still creating roadblocks to local control and local school boards actually making choices to go back to in-person instruction. it was honestly one of the worst things we could have done for our kids. And I think a lot of the kids are more behind now academically because of that. And so I completely agreed with their wanting to push back against the administration on that. It's also sort of hypocritical because his own attorney general, Rob Bonta, has currently, I believe this year, has currently sued the federal administration 54 times, I believe, at this point, since in the last year or two. And so there's clearly, not a pushback to the idea of suing an administration. It's just in this case, he tended to agree or disagree, I should say, with the board in Orange County pushing back on Newsom's mandates. And so I think that's a huge problem. I always tell the story of, during the pandemic, there was literally a guidance that came down from the state that said, if you were in the Board of Education room at a board meeting or on the dais, you didn't have to wear a mask. But every kid in the school district needed to continue masking. And I actually, at that point in time, my colleagues all wore masks. They said, let's wear masks in solidarity with the kids. And I said, absolutely not. Like, I was the only one in that meeting that came out without a mask. And I said, how ridiculous is it that I can sit here with no mask and legally, be following the guidance of the Newsom administration, but every single one of my kids and your kids have to continue to be masked? It's just absolutely ridiculous. And those were the mandates they were pushing back on. And I applaud them for that, and they shouldn't be getting attacked for that.
I want to dig a little bit more into what this process looks like, especially on the taxpayer side, as to why it's so important, as I believe it's the first audit that the Board of Education in Orange County has ever gotten.
It's the first audit that the Board of Education in Orange County has ever got that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I also asked the auditor in the hearing, have you ever audited a Board of Education? Because that's another thing. I've never seen that. I've only been here 4 years, but I've never seen that. And the auditor said, according to his knowledge, he's not aware of one. And so not only was it the first for Orange County, this is not something we typically do. And I would say normally you'd have to see a lot of really serious malfeasance coming out of, either fiscal malfeasance or some sort of fraud or some sort of reason to actually carry out this audit. And none of that evidence exists.
And so from here, how does that process work? I know that the Board of Education talked about how many hours they were going to have to spend, especially on the state side as well, and what that taxpayer dollars look like.
Yeah, it's going to be really a double whammy for taxpayers, right? Because it's going to cost the employees of the Board of Education time and effort to participate and comply with the audit. It's also going to cost the state auditor's office, a lot of money to carry out the audit. And so I would say usually what happens is over the next few months, they probably won't get started right away, but there will be at some point a process that starts where the state auditor will begin reaching out to the Board of Education to request certain documentation and carrying out the audit now that it has passed committee. Now, there's really no way to stop it at this point. The stopping point was the committee needed to reject the audit, which is what I called on them to do. Unfortunately, they did pass it. And so that process will start to go into effect in the next few months, is my guess. And it'll probably be a months-long process, if I'm being honest. I think the state auditor is going to be asking for a lot of documentation to try to carry out and comply with the questions that the audit committee has put forward.
Is there a reason why you think the committee sided with the senator and approved this?
It's interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen an audit by a member of the majority party fail in the audit committee. If so, it's only been one time. But typically speaking, I would say there's a lot of cohesion there. So if it's a member of the majority party and the committee is run by the majority party, that's typically, and they hear the audit, they typically will get that passed with no problem. The only audits I've really seen killed tend to be audits from the minority party. So including audits on homelessness and a number of other things that I think are really important to look into more.
Yeah, the supermajority in the state kind of seems to run the entire ground out
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And I think the Board of Education was very vocal about that, especially when I
Yeah.
talked to them. And they had questions about if the senator was going on into a different board, if his election comes into play, and who is exactly is backing him. I mean, do you believe that as well?
Yeah, I couldn't really speak to all of that. I just know that it's very politically motivated, right? And uh, it's not only is it bad precedent, but it is completely there's no actual justification for the audit other than politics, and I think that's a huge problem. It's really a bad example for what the audit committee should be. And what makes me even more frustrated is we're going after a board that's probably gotten better results for its students
Hmm.
and its kids than a lot of other boards in Southern California. I'm sure they're doing great work when it comes to academics, but we're not going after things we should be going after. We're actually going the other direction in California. We're passing laws that would make Public Records Act requests more expensive. We're passing laws that would hide more documents when it comes to high-speed rail. Like, there's all of these things we're refusing to look into, and yet we're going after the Orange County Board of Education, because we don't agree with their politics. I think that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I was at that first meeting after the audit was announced, and I had sat in because I expected, a mix of people, some
Yeah.
people that would speak out against them,
Right.
some people that would speak for them. Almost overwhelmingly, I think everyone, maybe one person who really didn't speak about the subject was there, but everyone across the board was in favor of them showing their support, telling them how much they thanked them for their jobs, how
Yeah.
much they really appreciated what they've done to the community, helped their children,
Yep.
how important the board is to them. And so I think it showed a lot of community support and kind of opened my eyes to see, like, oh, okay, this is something that they want to be transparent on and have been transparent on. Kind of going into the things that you just touched on a little bit, what audits are you looking at that would be more of a subject to look at versus the Board of Education?
Oh, absolutely. So, the one I mentioned that we passed a few years ago on homelessness was huge, and that really
Mhm.
started the ball rolling on really getting more accountability for the dollars we're spending on homelessness. Sadly, the legislature unanimously passed a bill to require every dollar we spend in California be tracked when it comes to homelessness, and the governor vetoed that bill a couple years ago. So, it's continuing sort of to hit some roadblocks with that. But this year, the audit that I'm working on is an audit of California's next generation 911 system, which essentially is in a really bad place right now. We spent 450 million taxpayer dollars developing a new next generation system for emergency response. And the California Department of Emergency Services has now said that system doesn't work. We're going to have to start from scratch. And so this is sort of yet another line in the failed technology projects that California has failed on over the last few years. And we're trying to get to the bottom of how this happened. What can be done? Is there anything that can be salvaged here? Can we save taxpayers from having to go back to the beginning? There's a lot of unknowns on what can actually move forward here, and so we're looking into that. It has not received a hearing yet, but we're hoping to get that on the docket for the next audit hearing.
Fraud has obviously been a big topic for California, especially within the last year. How do you get voters engaged on this issue? I mean, I feel like we get numbers just thrown at us and voters get really fatigued and they're like, okay,
Yeah.
what are we supposed to do about our tax dollars? We know that they're being wasted, but at the end of the day, like, what do we do?
Yeah, it's a good point. I actually just saw some polling in the last couple days that shows that fraud is actually growing on the list of things that voters care
Mhm.
more about. So I do think voters are very upset about the waste and the fraud and the abuse of their tax dollars. But it is hard. I think in terms of what you can do, obviously you need to support people that are going to hold these agencies accountable and hold people accountable. That's always an important thing. But the other thing is that, I tell my colleagues on the other side of the aisle this all the time. the ones that are always pushing for tax increases, it's like voters are never going to want to approve tax increases if they think you're wasting the money they're already giving you, right?
Yeah.
And so I've sort of told my colleagues this, that we should care, including you that wants to raise taxes. I personally don't like to raise taxes, but for the people that do, they should care that these resources are being wasted, because it's really creating a lot of mistrust among voters when they need to go back and ask for more. And so it's just really, to me, it just blows my mind that there's zero interest in this topic by the majority party. It seems like it's something they should care about too, and they don't seem to care.
Do you think it's on purpose?
Well, I think it's just they don't want to admit that it's happening, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a huge hospice fraud example in Los Angeles recently, over $200 million of fraud, and that's just scratching the surface, I think, of what we could see statewide. And the attorney general is now out there talking about it, but that's only because of the public pressure that was placed on him by voters, by investigative journalists. I mean, we have to force them to take fraud seriously. Otherwise, I think they're just going to ignore it.
Yeah, it seems like this administration does kind of do that. I don't want to say cover up, but it's almost a denial, especially with, one topic is Newsom and homelessness. I mean, there's been a touting that there's a 9% decrease in homelessness, even though the full report hasn't come out from HUD. Right. And there's also independent reports that say otherwise. I guess my question to that would be, why deny something that is so obvious to voters? When you go out to LA, there's homeless people everywhere. I mean, you go down the street, there's homeless people. You can see where your tax dollars are going, and they're not going where they're supposed to be going. Yeah.
No, it's incredibly frustrating. I think there's so much spin being put on the issue of homelessness. Governor Newsom's talking point on 9% decrease is completely inaccurate. It doesn't even include all the counties that are reporting homeless numbers. So it's completely false, honestly. And but I think he's basically trying to tell people, don't believe your eyes and ears. I mean, when we're out in our communities and we're seeing, people continue to be in our communities, and some are doing better than others. Don't get me wrong. I think there's some local governments that have been empowered by the Supreme Court to really take more action under the Grants Pass decision to really address homelessness in their communities and encampments. But the governor is honestly running for president right now, or attempting to run for president. And he needs everything to look really good. And he was just on Bill Maher, I think last week, talking about how the high-speed rail's on track. We're not over budget. We're under on homelessness, and it's all spin. Yeah.
I guess from that, my question just slipped out of my mind. But going back to the audit and the supermajority, is this something of a tactic that you see or can see happening down the line if it's not already happening?
Just in kind of going after other organizations or boards?
I think because fraud is such a big topic right now, I guess the way that I'm seeing it is a way to spin it back and kind of use it and weaponize it a little bit in their favor. Yeah.
I mean, I could definitely see that happening. I don't know the level of energy behind that, but it definitely puts boards and school boards or even local governments kind of on notice that one member of the legislature, if they disagree with something you're doing, they can present an audit to the audit committee and probably get their colleagues to vote for it if you don't sort of toe the line. And I think that's going to create a chilling effect, right, on the willingness of local governments to push back against the state when they disagree with them. And that could be on a number of topics, whether it's COVID, whether it's education, whether it's housing, whatever, you name it, homelessness. I think it's going to create a chilling effect, and it sends a message that you need to fall in line with what the supermajority and the governor really want you to believe.
Is there any hope in there? I mean, for the minority in the state, especially, because again, like the Board of Education, I mean, they were elected into that. The voters really wanted them to be in that position, and they support them.
Yeah. I mean, look, I always think there's hope. I'm a pretty optimistic person. I think there is definitely hope. I also think the courts will see through some of this. This audit is not going to be binding. It's more going to be probably bad press, right?
Mhm.
That's like the goal of the senator, is to get some bad press for this board, right? But the audit in itself is not going to harm them directly as much as, maybe a lawsuit could, right? So in those cases where the state's going after local governments with lawsuits, the courts are really going to have to make decisions on that, and that can sometimes go either way.
Yeah.
But I'm always hopeful that as long as local governments continue to fight back against some of the stuff they really find egregious, I would still encourage them to do that, because we do need to somehow counterbalance, right,
Hmm.
the supermajority in California, and we can't just do that from Sacramento.
And the big topic from the Board of Education was the waste of taxpayer dollars. So where do you think it would be better spent for our taxpayer dollars? I'm sure there's a number of things you could think
Oh
of.
yeah, I mean, just in terms of the audits,
Ye-
or yeah, I mean, look, right now I'm just trying to get a handle on the waste, right? Like,
yeah.
how many dollars are actually being wasted? Because we know it's happening on homelessness. We know it's happening on like hospice fraud. Obviously, this 911 project that I mentioned. There was also $30 billion, talking about COVID, $30 billion of fraud in the EDD, the uh, unemployment insurance,
Hmm.
essentially, during the pandemic itself, that most we never got back. We had checks literally being sent to people in California prisons through the EDD, because we were not holding accountable. It was too easy to scheme the system,
Hmm.
the unemployment insurance system. So, I mean, there's so many things that we've wasted money on. I really want to get a handle on all of that. My colleagues and I called a few weeks ago for a special session on waste, fraud, and abuse for that very reason. And then once we get a handle on that, I think then we start talking about what are our priorities for where that money should be going. I think, we need to change our approach on homelessness in California. I think we really need to get more serious about our kids' education, getting back to basics of literacy and math. A lot of the things that the board in Orange County really agrees with. Um, and just, yeah, I think there's so many other things we could be doing, but we can't do that until we actually take the fraud and the waste seriously.
Yeah. And I guess my last question to you would be, you kind of touched on the first tackle of fraud and waste. Where does it go from here? Do you have the support that you need?
Well, I don't think we have the support of the majority party in California. No, I think we're going to continue banging the drum in the media, banging the drum, to the public, and sharing with the people of California. And that's why I like this audit process typically, because it is a good way to show people this is the waste that's actually happening. I think it's only that's going to wake people up to really say, wow, the status quo in California is really broken. We need change in California. We need some new leadership in California. And so that's really where ultimately I hope things will go over time.
I lied. Last question.
No, no
This one.
worries.
How important is the media to this whole process? I mean, I know there's been a lot of slamming on corporate media. CBS obviously has
Yeah.
changed its tactics. It released the hospice thing. There's a lot of independent journalists out there for years that have covered California. It just hasn't gotten the
Hmm.
reach that it has with
Yeah.
some other people. So right now, what do you see the media playing in that?
Well, I think the media is critical, particularly when it comes to Sacramento,
Hmm.
because so much of the media attention is on Washington, D.C.,
Hmm.
and rightfully so. That's obviously, a lot of big stuff going on at the national level. But ultimately, there's a lot going on in Sacramento that doesn't get covered, that doesn't get reported on. There's thousands of bills that we pass every year, right? That just don't get enough attention. And I think there's some really good actors in the media right now that are doing a great job, like, trying to root out and tell people what's actually going on. I do think the media is going to play a critical role in both the, sort of corporate media, as you mentioned, but also investigative journalists. I think it's have to be a combined effort to play a role in shining a spotlight on California and all of the problems that exist here, not just to bash on California, but to point out where we need to do better and how we can like actually fix that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I think a lot of the voters, you have bills, or not bills, but things like the mental health diversion that voters just don't even know about until
Correct.
years later. And so it plays like a catch-up game of when voters are like, what are you talking about? We never voted on this.
Yep.
And it's like, yeah, because it was passed without you knowing. And so I think voters often kind of don't get the effects until later on, or they have the backlash of something like Prop 36 that they voted for and never got. And so I think they, again, feel fatigued a little bit, especially within the state. It's overwhelming sometimes.
It is. And I will just add, if I may, one of the really egregious examples this year of something people had no idea was going on is in 2020, California passed a law on public safety that basically said, with very few exceptions on crimes you've committed, if you are 50 years old and have served 20 years of your sentence in California, you can be eligible for parole back into your community. That has resulted in my community in multiple sexually violent predators being released back into our community that committed terrible crimes towards kids and things like that. People that should not be back on the streets, that are not rehabilitated. Those are the type of things that people don't know until it's too late a lot of the times. And that's the stuff we're trying to sound the horn on and say we need to get out in front of this. Because what we've seen, especially on public safety issues, is public pressure can lead to reform, can lead to change. And especially if it gets the governor's ear, he will actually call legislators and say, you need to fix this. But until that pressure builds up, it's really hard to create change in California without a change in leadership.
Are you hearing what particular things are you hearing from constituents on the ground about their feelings about the state, about fraud, about waste, about their taxpayer dollars?
I mean, there's a lot of that, right? A lot of people always expressing concerns about where their taxpayer dollars are going. I think right now, the biggest thing we're getting feedback on is people are feeling a lot of pain in their pocketbooks, right? Like the affordability issue, the cost of living in California, even in my area, which is, I would say, somewhere in the middle in California. It's just everything is so expensive. And so I think that's what we're hearing the most from our constituents on, is just, why is everything costing this much? And so much of that is driven by California policy decisions made by the legislature that are adding burdens to businesses, adding regulations, that are running oil refineries out of the state and forcing gas prices up. I mean, there's so many things going on that, people might not see the direct effects, but they're choices we're making as a legislature that are leading to those cost increases. It's not just happening by accident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Appreciate it. Thank you.